Okay, let's get the show on the road. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is John Avery, Bradmark Technologies. I'm marketing manager here. I'd like to welcome you all to our today's presentation, our SAP Bradmark Webcast live event. We're going to be talking about the new HANA Cloud services. We continue as Bradmark continues to serve the user community at large that we support. We specifically target and are specializing in the SAP Sybase user community specifically. For the most part, we have a long standing relationship, and we continue to do that today. We have today our two speakers. Once again, we have Chris Baker, SAP ASE and SRS product manager, and then we also now have Tom Slee from SAP as well, SAP Cloud, HANA Cloud product manager, and both reigning out of Ontario, Canada. And so before we get started, I'd like to know that all of our attendees are muted. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And so I would advise everyone, if you have questions, to submit those in the Q&A tab, and we will either answer those throughout the presentation, or we will hold off until the end. And I would suggest that you hold off to questions to the end of the presentation so that we can have everybody's input and we can answer those questions accordingly. So without further ado, I will go ahead and pass on to Chris Baker. Chris, I will stop my share and let you go ahead and get going. Let's see. Chris, are you with me?
Yes, I am. Sorry. Thank you.
Not a problem. Hang on.
Thank you, John.
Let me stop my share here, Star, and let you pass it on. Go right ahead.
Thank you, John. My name is Chris Baker, as we said, and as John mentioned, and with me here today is Tom Slee. I am the on-premise SAP ASE and SRS product manager. We've got Tom with us today as the HANA Cloud product manager for some of the newer services. And we will, whoops, I'm not sharing my, there we go. There we go.
There you go.
So sorry about that.
No problem.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take you through just a couple of things on the cloud and show you how to get there, and then we will continue with the presentation, and I'll hand it over to Tom. So, as always, these are some of the forward-looking statements. But what we'll be showing you today is essentially finding SAP and SRS in the cloud. Many of you are familiar with our on-premise offerings. So how do you get to these new services in the cloud? And then I'll be handing it over to Tom to show the actual HANA Cloud user experience, how you actually provision services, how you provision an instance of ASE, for example, and how you would connect to it. So how do you get to ASE in the cloud, or the HANA Cloud, and those ASE services? So the simplest and fastest way to get there is to use the SAP Discovery Center. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop out of this, and if I go to the link, the SAP Discovery Center itself, that is at https://discovery-center.cloud.sap, and this is what you're presented to if you don't have a login. So to get to these new services, what you initially will have to do is go to the service catalog, click on that, and you will see the list of the various services that are presented in our managed cloud capabilities. And what we want to look at is, in this particular case, data management, and we want to go to the SAP HANA Cloud. You'll receive an overview of some of the features that you can see. It gives you the architecture view. We can expand on that. You can have a look at the various parts and descriptions of this. And if we jump now to something like pricing and the subscriptions we may have, these are the services that we now have on offer with the SAP HANA Cloud. So of course you have HANA, our high-performance in-memory database application. We have Data Lake, which is essentially IQ on-premise, now in the cloud as a service. And now, as we've recently announced, we have Adaptive Server Enterprise, the familiar online transactional processing engine that many of you are familiar with on-premise, and they have the ability to do replication within the cloud as a service between ASE instances. So this is how you will get to the actual services and see what you need to do to price it, to buy it, etc. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hand it over to Tom to continue the presentation into how would you actually provision it, connect to it with your existing applications. So Tom, we'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Let me find my way around here. Share my screen. I just want to start off on, all right, so I think we know that most of you are familiar with ASE and Rep Server, and obviously Bradmark's tools for working with those. And thanks to John and Ed for the opportunity to speak to you and to collaborate with Bradmark. It's always a good thing to do. So now what we've got happening, as you might have heard, is that we've taken SAP ASE and Rep Server and we're making them available in the cloud. And so what we're trying to do here is just introduce that to you and say, like, what does that mean? What's different? What's the same? What do I get on the cloud? What do I get on premise? How does that work? What's the difference? So we're just trying to really set an orientation for those services. So I sometimes find it helpful to start with this, and then I'll show you, go to a browser and show you around the sites. But because over the time, you'll know that the Sybase business, since the acquisition by SAP, we're now one part of this bigger company. And the engineering team and the team who works on these services, we're continuing to do so. But we are, because this is now a cloud offering, in a way, what we're bringing is not just provided by the ASE and Rep Server engineering team, it's things provided by all layers of the organization. So this HANA Cloud is a larger organization that provides the HANA database and builds a bunch of the infrastructure we'll talk about in a minute. And then we're also part of a bigger organization still. That runs a thing called the Business Technology Platform. And that's a whole set of cloud services that SAP hosts. And then underneath all that, at the corporate level, there's a whole bunch of things that get done to provide, they sort of buy things off Microsoft and AWS so we can run data centers. They do a bunch of industry certification things and standards and handle that kind of corporate level. So in a way, what we're delivering here is driven partly by ASE and Rep Server engineering team, but it includes stuff from a lot of other parts of the organization as well. So from my point of view as a product manager, for that's kind of a good thing. It means we're bringing in a way more weight behind us in what we do. But so Chris said, so I mentioned this thing called the Business Technology Platform. Now, so if you want to, Chris showed you there's this thing called the Discovery Center, and that's certainly the place that you can go to learn about the cloud services, including ASE and Rep Server in the cloud. But let me just show you how this works. The thing that I want to show you here is if you sign on to the SAP Business Technology Platform, you get your account and you buy HANA Cloud is what you buy, and then you can spend spend that subscription on ASE and Rep Server services. Then when you use it, you log on to this thing we call the BTP cockpit, Business Technology Platform cockpit. And the thing to know there is this is what we call a global account, and it's with SAP. Like we're running on Azure and we're running on AWS, but your account to run these things is all with us. So it's a managed database server that SAP is providing, which is quite different from taking a bring your own license and running it on Azure, say. So you have this thing here. So we have a global account. You can have sub-accounts. So each sub-account, and I'm just showing one here, is this one's, I've called this Azure US East because it's running on Azure and it's in the US East data center. So each sub-account is associated with a particular cloud provider and a particular region. So if we go into there, then underneath there's sort of a hierarchical structure to this. So you can arrange different what we call spaces. So for example, here, this is my product management global account. We have 3 spaces under this particular sub account. There's a demo one, there's a development one, which has 11 things running. And our colleagues with success factors are trying some things out. So they're starting to use something there. But I'm actually going to go into the development one. So this is a sub account. Sorry, this is now a space. And this is where you can now see SAP HANA Cloud. So if I look here, you'll see there's a bunch of things running. We have one set up that we're running some things together with the folks at Bradmark here, but a bunch of other instances that are running. And each of these, you'll see there's some data lake instances, as Chris said, that's kind of IQ running in HANA Cloud. ASE instances here. We have a couple of replication server instances, and we could have HANA instances running as well. So this BTP cockpit is where you kind of orient yourself. But if you actually want to work with this specifically, then I think the place to go is what we call SAP HANA Cloud Central, which gives you another tab. So this is an application that we're filling out. So again, let's look here at the dev space. I have 3 things running here. I'll show them to you a bit later. But this is where you can create an instance of HANA database or data lake or ASE or ASE replication. So, just so we're clear, what you've got is HANA Cloud, but you want to create an ASE instance. Let's just walk through what it takes for you to do that. So I'll just call this call it Bradmark demo. Make it a production instance. I'm going to add a password. You'll see. I want to go through a few things here for ASE users. You'll see that the root account, if you like, is not the SA account that you might be used to. It's called ASE admin. And we can go through that a bit later, like why we have a different root account and what the implications of that are. Then after that, you get to say, well, how much do I want? How many CPUs do I want? So you can do that. You can choose as many CPUs as you want, up to 4, up to 60. Smaller instances coming coming soon. There's a thing here that says memory type, but really it's just a ratio of memory to compute. So if currently it's at 16 gigabytes, because standard is 4:1, but you can choose 8:1 or 16:1. So you want more memory, you want to cache more. You can choose that, and then you can choose your total amount of storage. And again, we go from 128 gigs up to 64 terabytes there. The step 3 lets you set some other things a bit more. It gives you more control over the storage distribution. The way it works is we set up basically 2 volumes, one for data storage and one for log storage, which have a bit different characteristics, of course. And you can choose how much you want to put on each. So right now it's 128 gigabytes, and I've just split it 50-50, but you can change that around if you want. We support the creation of page size, the ASE 16 page sizes, so from 2K up to 16K. I'm going to leave this at 16 for now. We let you choose the frequency of your full and log backups. So here I've said do a backup every day at 8 o'clock in the evening, and then do a transaction log backup every 30 minutes. So you can tune how much you want that to happen. How long do you want to keep the backups for? Right now, it's from a day to 30 days. We're looking at doing longer storage, but that's what we have right now. And then you have to choose your character set and your sort order. And again, we support those that are supported by ASE 16. And then finally, you get to choose your connections. So it's sort of an allow list. Do you want to allow connections from anywhere or from specific IP address ranges, as you'd expect? So I'm not actually going to create this one because I have it done already. But I hope what that does is it gives you an idea of what it takes to create an ASE instance. It's fairly straightforward. It's just walk through a wizard. But let me show you one other thing, because often if you're going to do this, if you want to automate tasks, then you won't want to be going through a UI every time. And we do provide API-based ways of managing this. SAP Business Technology Platform does use fairly heavily a microservice framework called Cloud Foundry. It's an open source project. SAP is a big contributor to it. And so our APIs run through this Cloud Foundry setup. So for example, I'm logged in here through this Cloud CF command line tool, which you can get. Allows you to do a whole bunch of things. I'm just going to list the services that I have. To start with, you'll see here's a bunch of ASE and data lake services, and you'll see that Bradmark one at the top. So that's the same list we were looking at through the UI a little while ago. And if you want to create a service, then you put together a JSON file which basically has the same kind of information that you put into the UI, how many CPUs, how much memory, size, backup interval, number of hours, and so on. And then you can run what we call a CF create service command. Actually, this one here is, which I picked up in my command history, is actually going to create a replication server instance, but it's the same kind of thing. You just supply a JSON file, run the CF command, and it'll create an instance for you. Okay. So we can, if you've got questions about that, we can talk about it at the end, but let's just plow on here. We've talked about provisioning. Let's talk about connecting. So what you'll need to know there is you need to know your host name and port, just like any other kind of connection. And those two are put together in what we call the SQL endpoint. So you can get that from here. I'm just going to copy that. Let me just show you what that looks like. Paste it into Notepad here. All right, so here's the host and port name. So basically what we've got is this first part here. This is the instance ID. It just represents the specific instance. And then this ASE HXTP, that's the Kubernetes landscape that we're running on within the data center. It's an ASE specific one. Prod US 21 says we're running in our US East data center. And then all our instances have hanacloud.ondemand.com as a domain name. And then the port is 443. And that means it's an HTTPS port because we're going through load balancers and edge service at the end. And that does have one consequence for connectivity, which is that you do need, we will have support for the required protocol to go through these edge services in our next release of the ASE 16 client. But for now, you would need to get a new client that comes with the cloud subscription to use this. The exception to that is JDBC, where you can use the version 16 driver. But for Open Client and Open Server, you would need a new one at the moment. All right, so that's the SQL endpoint. How do you use that? I don't need that anymore. So let me just clear this. So you use it just the same way you would any other host and port for ASE. Here's my interfaces file showing I can connect to those things. It's just a regular open client interfaces file. So my launch ASE 1 instance, I have that, there's that SQL endpoint, the host and the port. And then at the end, I've got an SSL specification. And I just list the hanacloud.ondemand.com. And for most OSs, you'll find the client certificate is already in the store. So you don't need to do anything fancy beyond this. And then if I want to connect to that, here I'm just going to use Squish to connect. And you're connected to your ASE instance. I think the point here is that we are aiming for a high level of compatibility, that if you're running tools in your data center that you're running, you're doing you have some task that you run against your ASE instances, that ideally you would be able to just add in the cloud instance to your interfaces file and carry on doing it in exactly the same way. So that's connectivity. I think now I might go to some slides. And I'm going to, excuse me for a second while I flip back here. So we've gone through connectivity. I'm going to talk for about another 5 or 10 minutes and then hand over to Ed for some stuff from Bradmark. But let me just cover 2 things that here in the next few minutes. So one is just, let's say, so this is, it's an ASE instance, but it's a managed instance. So what does that mean? It means, for example, you don't have access to the machine on which the ASE is running. You can't SSH into it. You have SQL connections and you have APIs, and that's what you have at your end. I mentioned at the beginning that the account that you have is ASE admin. So that's the top left here, what we call the customer admin account. That's your root account, if you like. It lets you create user databases. It lets you manage logical resources. You can, configure data caches, for example. You can assign databases to devices, that kind of thing. You can look into the server infrastructure, but you can't necessarily control, you can't give yourself more disk space, for example, through this. That's all done through the APIs and through the external tools. So that's your side of it. On our side, we have 2 accounts of interest. One is down the bottom right here, what we call SAP Technical User. It's not used by humans. This is what the control plane uses to do its work. So when you go through the UI and say provision a database, during that provisioning process, this SAP TU account, SAP Technical User account, carries out some of that startup tasks, right? And so that's it comes in there. When we're running the backup services, it's the SAP Technical User account that used to connect to that and run the backup service. It doesn't have access to any user data, to any of your user databases. It doesn't have access to customer data. So we try to keep that separate. The other root account we have is SAP Support, and that's used by 2 groups of people within SAP. One is our operations team. And this is, again, if we were just part of Sybase, we couldn't really do this, but we share an operations team with the rest of HANA Cloud. So there's 24/7 sort of round the sun operations who will track what's going on in the data centers. And then the other group is technical support. So if you open up a ticket around some of this, then our tech support has access to this account. Anything beyond that, you would have to grant them access. Here, this account, it can look at system infrastructure, how it's laid out. It can make some changes about operational matters. Again, it has no access to user data, and that's. But but it gets to look inside, see what's going on. So I hope that's a quick scan around sort of design principles and how we've tried to separate things. And as you'll see, it's the same for ASE and IQ, same for IQ and HANA. We've tried to be standard across the different database services that we're providing. I'll skip past that. So the final thing I want to say, just in the last few minutes, before I hand it back to John and Ed, is as a product manager, I get to see a bit of what's gone on in the background, and I think what I want to say with this slide is that what's going on here is we haven't just taken ASE, stuck it in a container and run it up on an Azure sentence. We've built a whole bunch of stuff around it to make sure that it runs right. And so here are some of the services that are part of HANA Cloud that are developed and run within any HANA Cloud data center. So in that US East account that I was looking, all these services are running. So let's go through them quickly. So for security, we've got, we use a Vault service to handle any certificates, to handle passwords, to hold all those things, to have, we have an integration with an SAP system called Customer Access Management, which is a thing that you have to go through if you want access to that SAP support account. So all that kind of security from certificates through to policy enforcement is done in there, and audits as well. The cybersecurity holds audit tables, and any actions done by SAP people are audited in there. So that's one. If we go around the edge servers, we have a bunch of load balancers and edge servers to where all the traffic goes through. So those are kept running. We have an observability framework, which is currently mainly provides stuff to the operations team, but we'll be providing more in the way of alerts and monitoring as time goes on. But this means that they have access to metrics about the service, dashboards that they need to do their job. I'm going to skip over the infrastructure scalability, but I will just say this is, we run a Kubernetes. If you look at the top right infrastructure, we run a Kubernetes-based cloud service. On top of Kubernetes, there's a project that SAP runs called Gardener, which means that you can try to run Kubernetes across cloud providers from AWS to Azure to Google Cloud Platform. So we have that going. And then we have continuous integration, continuous development. So down the bottom where we deploy new versions of the software into the cloud. So there's a fair amount of stuff going back behind the scenes here. We're trying to strike a balance between maintaining compatibility with 16, making sure that you can move stuff back and forward between on-premises and the cloud, but right now, but while at the same time providing added value in the cloud. So that's what we're trying to do. I think I'm going to stop there. I'll stop the share and hand it back to John or to carry on. But I think just to wrap up my bit of this, as I say, we're trying to we just released these services a couple of weeks ago at the end of March, at the end of a fairly long period of development. But we are aware that they are in their early stages. We've got a lot of work to do to fill that out. And we're certainly interested in feedback from SAP ASE end users. So we'll be listening to what Ed tells us that he needs, but also we're interested in what you need to make these services worthwhile for you. So with that, I'm going to hand back.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. Wonderful presentation today. Nice, wonderful insight. Truly appreciate that. Hoping everybody can find some value in having knowing what options they have moving into a cloud environment or service. So again, thank you, and as well, Chris, as well. I know I was hesitant to share the fact that we are going to have Ed share some insight with us as well, and I'm going to hand that over to Ed right now. Ed, are you available?
Oh, thank you, John.
Okay, go right ahead.
Just go ahead and share the SharePoint. Excuse me, the share slides on that. So yeah, it was really great information from Tom and Chris. Really great things with HANA, SAP HANA Cloud, and all the advantages that it has going forward, and just really an amazing effort by SAP to bring ASE and Replication Server now to HANA Cloud, and then of course earlier Data Lake IQ and HANA itself. Go to the next slide. So we'll go ahead and cover just a couple of things that are general about Bradmark Surveillance, our monitoring product that Bradmark has for these SAP products. Just some generic things about some of the benefits that we have. And, we do, what we're going to be talking about is, Bradmark Surveillance itself is going to be supporting HANA Cloud services and all the things that we've normally done for on-premises. All those benefits for on-premises is now something that we're bringing to HANA Cloud as well. So all of the web monitoring that we've been able to do on premises and cloud instances before are now available, going to be available for HANA Cloud as well. And that includes a lot of different metrics covering all sorts of ranges of things to be able to monitor your database. Historical metrics are available. So even if the database is offline, we can find out what was the problem yesterday at 3 o'clock, what was the problem last week. That historical information is available, and as well as reports for compliance are available. Things like tracking SQL, bad logins, auditing information. That's of course still available for ASE. And we also have unique metrics for in-depth analysis for ASE Replication Server IQ. This is the kind of thing that we did before with on-premises, and where we can do a compliance auditing, where this is actually taking audit information from ASE and producing reports from that, either as a web report or as a PDF. We also have certain notable features of surveillance that will be available for HANA Cloud as well. Things like time slicing. So as I mentioned, you can say, what's the top SQL between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock yesterday, for example, and take a look at that by elapsed time and CPU time, other types of ways of looking at that, looking at old query plans for that time period. Those kinds of things are great information from the historical record, as well as looking at top SQL by hour of day. So you can see throughout the day, what were the SQL statements that were impactful by time, CPU, IO, those kinds of things. Our flashback feature, where you can go back in time and take the real-time interface back in time, is available. So you can go back 7 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, and correlate a lot of different windows to see what was going on at that time. Web reporting and audit reports are available, as I mentioned. We also have a lot of hardening done for the product so that if you do need to have additional requirements like PCI DSS or things like that, we're very capable of operating in that environment. And of course, with HANA Cloud, your connections are done to the instance using SSL, so that's all secure by various mechanisms. We also have an alerts dashboard that you can see the red, yellow, green status by the database and see what's up and what's down. We also have other types of reports, which we'll see in a moment as well. But surveillance for HANA Cloud, we've already supported these things in different types of cloud environments, and HANA Cloud is just another environment for us, but it's really a great step forward for SAP for offering the services like ASE and Rep Server on the HANA Cloud. It provides so many advantages, things like the flexibility in terms of the management and the flexibility of deployments, flexibility of pricing is really great. The ability to connect seamlessly. I mean, it's very, from a customer's perspective, we find that the HANA Cloud instances are just as easy to get to as on premises. So I think Tom mentioned some of the different options available, and really it's amazing how easy SAP has made it to integrate the HANA Cloud stuff with your existing applications. But from our perspective, we're able to offer one web client. We have an HTML5 web client that we have. We're able to offer one web client that monitors all the databases in the cloud. So whether you've got ASE, IQ, Rep Server, HANA, or a plethora of other types of databases, we're able to monitor all of that from one pane of glass, so to speak, and monitor very similar things across the different databases. So, a lot of our databases, we can monitor overall health, and we have a lot of different metrics for that. We can monitor what's currently running, like the current SQL statements. We can look at space usage. All that common stuff is available, as well as the more in-depth items. Like for Rep Server, we have the things like the exceptions information and the loss detection and those kinds of things. So with monitoring all the databases and surveillance, we provide something we call our central alerter server, or a central CAS instance, where all the DBAs can log in. They can easily browse all the databases. We have different permissions that you can set so that different people have access to different databases, different windows, different alerts. As I mentioned, we have the alerts dashboard to show a nice red, green, yellow access view of what's going on with the databases. And we can also do uptime or SLA reporting against those databases. So now, even with the instances in the cloud, it's critical to monitor the availability of those instances and if they're up and down and things like that. There's still certainly a good level amount of things that you want to be monitoring for the cloud instances of the databases, in addition to of course, all the automatic things that you get from having the managed service with SAP. And then, of course, users can easily browse all the different databases from one particular starting point. This is an example of the kind of uptime report that you can generate, the different databases that are available, and the amount of uptime. You can generate, of course, PDFs from this as well. So we are having a new release of the Bradmark surveillance product to support the HANA Cloud ASE, Data Lake IQ, Rep Server. And we'll also have a patch available soon to add the support to existing installations. So we'll have full support for HANA Cloud and being able to integrate that into your existing systems. The instance with Bradmark surveillance can be hosted either on premises or in a cloud instance. And we monitor all the similar critical areas that we've been providing for other types of databases, from the overall health to the historical SQL and a lot of other things as well. Now, I'd like to talk about a few, just get into a little bit more HANA Cloud specific items, specifically for HANA Cloud ASE. From a customer's perspective, I thought I'd share a few of the things that we've seen along the way that may be useful as you transition to HANA Cloud. One thing that really strikes you immediately from I know a lot of our customers from SAP don't have granular permissions turned on, and that's definitely one thing that you'll hit with the HANA Cloud system, is that they do have enable granular permissions turned on, and that, of course, that has a lot of ramifications to a lot of different things that you may be used to. So they have that turned on, and then they have several new roles created to help deal with the permissions and to offer a nice separation of roles in the instance. So, but again, if you have any granular permissions already turned on, you probably have a much smoother transition for that. They do have new roles. For example, they do have a cust SA role, or I guess it's customer SA role. That would be normally what you would have for SA role, but of course it's less capable in certain areas. But for a lot of things, cust SA role does act like SA role. And similarly, instead of SSO role, you have cust SSO role that provides a lot of that functionality. And there are several new roles to take up some of the functionality that's not included in that. The user SA is locked down hard, and but they do have new accounts also for service-related activities. So from SAP, Tom mentioned that SAP is doing some of the managing, of course, because it's a managed service, and so they're using accounts like the SAP TU and SAP support accounts that have their own roles as well. And there's other accounts in addition to that. There's also a new account called ASE Admin, which that's an account that is very similar in some ways to SA, and that you probably will be starting out with as an administrator on these instances. One other notable difference between HANA Cloud and the on-premises, currently at least, is the way Sap System Procs is handled in some situations. Because of the granular permissions, Sap System Procs, items created in Sap System Procs are owned by users or use DB_user, depending on various things, instead of DBO, and that makes a difference for lookup roles. So as many of you know, if you have an ASE, you can create a procedure in Sap System Procs or master, and then you can execute it anywhere. That's no longer possible currently on the HANA Cloud system. So you do have to prefix it with the database name, and that does impact a few things. But there may be hope. There is an SAP CR 824528 that may address this. They're currently working on it, I guess. And one of the things it may allow is ASE admin created items to act as if it was DBO. in terms of lookup rules. But this is all may or may not happen. But so there may be something coming down the line to help with that particular instance. In other respects, though, Sybase System Procs Master, they all function very similarly for many other application purposes. And also, as Tom mentioned, there's a bit of difference in connectivity. I would like to mention, especially if you're doing options through things like OCS config or SQL INI, there's a connection option called server address, which traditionally has supported the host space port syntax. Well, for recent versions of STK, they've supported an extended syntax that was host space port space filter, where the filter was to add SSL option, things like that. And that's been, I can't remember how long now, it's been a couple versions now. But in SDK 20, which is what you would probably use to get to HANA Cloud, they really extended that to support the extra syntax needed for HANA Cloud. And you can actually specify all this on the command line if you wanted to. So you can see here is an example of an iSQL statement with made up a little connect string here, but this is the kind of connect string that you would have to put in an iSQL section to connect to. And I think it probably is easier to hide that away in an interfaces file. But it is possible to connect directly with this extended syntax that's available in SDK 20 and later. So I'd also like to make another few comments just from a customer perspective, and these are all subject to change at any time. This is just from a customer perspective that we've noticed from using the HANA Cloud service to kind of give you an idea of a few things that we saw along the way. Of course, HANA Cloud is a managed service from SAP, and what's really great is that SAP is responsible for the front end of it. So the SAP BTP is where you go log into, and then HANA Cloud Central is another thing that gets launched from there. Those are really the front end interfaces. You create the instances there. The SAP manages those instances. On the back end, which is really very seamless to you, the back ends can run on the various providers like Azure, AWS, Google Cloud. I think there are a few others as well for different regions. And now, we're currently, at least as of a few weeks ago, ASE Replication Server were only available in the Azure backend provided and not available in the others yet. But I would imagine that's probably going to change over time. But really, it's very seamless to you, and you're able to set that up. You're able to get up and running in no time at all. It's really great the on-demand capability of creating the SAP instances on there, the ASEs and the replication servers and the IQs. And also, some of the services may not be available in all regions. There is some little bit differences in regions. So when you set it up, you create, I think Tom had his example labeled as US East, for example. So there are different areas like US West, Europe, Singapore, and other types of regions as well. And then also, just FYI, right now they're being created on SUSE Linux 12.4 instances, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then the internal version of ASE, they really have the new stuff on there, as you saw from the SDK version. The SDK version is 20, and the ASE internal version is also 20 on the HANA Cloud instance. And currently, the SDK is available for download, so you can get that right now. So just to briefly mention some of the things that you've already been able to do with surveillance on-premises and other cloud instances, you can also do with HANA Cloud ASE, is you can do things like the SQL by time range, where you can see over a time period what are the most impactful statements, and then take a look at the query plans even historically. You can take a look at the SQL by hour of day. So if you want to see the most impactful statements by hour, here you can see there was a couple things going on between 12 and 16. And you can also take a look at our flashback capability, where it's a set of DVD type of controls, and you can go back and forth and take the whole real-time interface and do all that. So to give you an idea what that looks like, I'll just briefly pop up the live demonstration of that. So here we are on a demo system, and you can see this is our HTML5 web client. It looks similar to our Flash client, if you're familiar with that. And we can easily log in here and take a look at several different systems that are configured. We have systems for ASE, we have IQ. Now, what I'm showing here is not on HANA Cloud, but the similar kinds of things are available in the HANA Cloud instance. So, for example, we can go in here and open up a health window, see the overall health of the ASE instance. We have the information. This is a 16 SPO3, the process summary, the data cache read, CPU percent, disk IO, configure resources that are above 80% full as database segments. And then we have different areas for engines, device I/O, and those kinds of things. So an overall idea about health. And then we can also see more information, more specific things like we can see CPU utilization over the last 8 hours. We can take a look at disk I/O for the last 8 hours and those kinds of things. A little bit of historical information. And then we can also see what's currently running out there. So here we have the currently running SQL. Now there's really not much going on. So I'm going to go ahead and do flashback up here to, let's say, yesterday at 15 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And you can see here we had a blocking scenario situation going on. A couple of statements here, the full SQL text. We can get the SP show plan. You can see the full SP show plan here, procedure stack, and those kinds of things. And then I could go back and forth, go forward a few minutes, go backward a few minutes, those kinds of things, or pop right back to the present day. We also have a lot of other database information, things like databases. We can drill down on here, load index stats on the database, see the information like the index page cluster ratios, data row cluster ratios, and those kinds of things. And then finally, we can take a look, for example, at the top SQL. In addition to looking at it by a particular time range, what we saw earlier, you can look at it at a particular time range and then look at the SP show plans and stuff like that. You can also take a look at it by hour of day. So here I'm going to take a look over the last 24 hours, and you can see not a whole lot going on, but there is something that was more impactful from around noon on this particular day, and I can see the full SQL text for that. And I can break that down by different types of ways, by CPU, wait time, logical reads, those kinds of things as well. So go ahead and go back to the presentation here. Now, that what I was just showing you was actually on our demo system, which you can also take a look at if you like for yourself. You can see the new HTML5 web client that we have running on demo.bradmark.com:12411. There's activity generally between 1 and 5 p.m. Eastern, but if it's not available at that time you're there, you can, of course, flash back and see more information as well. So I'll go ahead and hand it back to you, John.
Well, thanks again, Ed. Obviously, we're going to move on and great insight as far as surveillance is concerned. We will go ahead and start answering any questions that our audience has right at this point in time. Ed, you know, you're the technical guy. I'm going to make sure, because I'm going to flub it up, I know, but so I'm going to have you take over here and have you, Chris, and Tom address any issues that we may have, questions that we may have from our audience. So, you know, we'll keep it here and I'll let you run the show here from this point on. Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you, John. So we have a question that came in. One of the questions is, what is in HANA Cloud ASE, for example, what's the kind of the way that backups are handled? What is what's done by the service and what's done by the customers? About how in terms of restores and backups, how does that handled in the cloud instances? I guess that's a question. I'm not sure. Either one.
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah.
I'll take that one, Chris.
Take that, Tom.
Yeah. So the backup is a scheduled thing. So you as the end user get to set the schedule, but the backup is carried out by operations, by an automated process. So there's scheduled backup. You can't right now set a backup going, but you will be able to before too long. As for restores, again, right now you have to open a ticket to get a restore. So that's a tech support call. We are certainly looking at restoring into one of the catches that just as background you should know is everything that's stored on the in the cloud is encrypted. So we're using database encryption throughout. So one of the things that is we will be providing, but again, not just there yet, is restoring into other databases so that you can use backups as development databases or something like that. But right now, the story is backup is carried out by SAP at a schedule dictated by you, and restore is a ticket.
Great, that's good to know. Another question we have is, I guess this is actually for Tom. What are the plans for HADR? Are there integrations? Are there any integration possibilities with HANA?
Yeah, so HADR That's one of those topics where I thought this was a binary question for a long time. Like, do you have HA or do you not? And do you have DR or do you not? And of course, it turns out, like anything, to be a bit more subtle than that. So right now, what we have, because we're running in a containerized environment on very durable storage that we're purchasing, and that. So we provide guarantees on the storage, but right now it's just a restart of the server is the only level of HA that we provide. We have it in our roadmap. So there's a place you can go, roadmaps.sap.com. We do have in our roadmap what we call multi-availability zone HA coming by the end of the year. So that means that you can get data will be replicated to another availability zone within the same region, and that we can then provide a restore from there. Again, that's probably not zero downtime. So I think what you're going to see is over the next year or so, an expansion, a steady expansion of HA features. That's what we're hoping for. The other thing, of course, is we do provide rep server. So if you want to roll your own, you're able to do that.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that as well.
Sure.
We're aware of the service level agreements that many of you will have for your applications, and that's also why HADR, which is a more of a hot standby solution, is being looked at to provide near instantaneous failover versus waiting for the restart, waiting for that container to fail over.
Great.
On the HANA integration. So what we will have, again, I think it's in Q3. It's coming. The first thing will be to have proxy tables from HANA into ASE. I think the main role of HANA for ASE users will be if you want to do fast analytics on your ASE data, right? So you basically be able to do proxy tables. So that will let you do two things. Proxy tables from HANA into ASE will let you pull data into HANA, either just by proxying or by actually sort of querying it in, loading it into HANA. So that lets you do a couple of things. One is it will let you use a bunch of the functions that HANA has. There's some, for example, neat data anonymization functions and things like that you'll be able to use against ASE data. And then if you pull it right into HANA, then you'll get a lot of performance on your analytics. So we're hoping to do that.
Great. Some questions, maybe for Chris here. Can I run? I guess they're concerned about cron batches that are doing things like update stats, DBCC commands, those kinds of things. Are they able to do that from a different box without OS access on the cloud?
Yeah. There's two parts to that answer. Number one is certain things, as Tom said, there's a separation of duties. So, backup stuff is coming, but right now you cannot cron backups as you may be traditionally able to do. And part of that is also because backup server is being altered to support things like Bitbucket, object stores versus that you have access to versus, direct file access, which you don't have access to. Things like update stats, you always have access to doing update stats, and we're also on premise and in the cloud supporting HADR update statistics pass through for such things where replication servers are involved. DBCCs will again depend on the functionality that's being performed. So some operations will be done through DBCC back capabilities that you're familiar with. Others will have only access through the operators. So it really depends. So certain things, this is cloud, so you do not have OS level access. Whether, it's not just our rule, it's the way cloud and containers work.
Right. And I guess a little bit of a related question too. I know that during the live event, the launch event, excuse me, or they were showing, or maybe it was some other one I was looking at, there's some new commands like on rep server to help deal with some of the, because there are some things you had to have OS access to before to do, like to edit some files. I think there's some new commands on rep server to help you handle that kind of thing. But the question is, can somebody dump the rep server queue without OS access?
That I will have to look into again, because if it uses the file system, there are changes As you noticed, we're adding new commands, and so that sort of thing might depend on us basically dumping direct to an object store that you would have access to. So I will have to follow up on that question, to be honest.
Okay, no problem. Another question, this is about latency between the cloud providers and the rep server. How is the latency handled there? Is there any kind of guarantee, or is there any way to deal with any potential latency, or is there no latency, I guess?
We will have, sorry, Tom, you can answer that, sorry.
I'm not quite sure which latency they'll be referring to. So what we have is, late application to database latency. I don't know if that's going to resolve to be the same thing. It's going to depend on where you put your application. For most things, I think what we're going to see is that, for example, if you run, all right, so we have, for example, we run in the Netherlands Azure, right? So if you run a HANA Cloud instance in Azure Netherlands, and then you have an Azure account of your own, and you run your application in your account in Azure Netherlands, we've seen kind of a millisecond in terms of network latency between application and database. That's an area where we talk to Microsoft, and I think it's a thing that's common to all cloud provided data services. We think that the standard of latency is getting better, but that's where we are at the moment.
Okay,
I'm not
great.
quite sure if there's a rep server specific aspect to that question that I'm missing.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is this is, the question, if it's between providers, you're relying still on public internet connectivity. I mean, we utilize that, as Tom says, we're working with some of the specific vendors to ensure that we get the highest speed between our containers. But it really is going to be at the vendor level, the hyperscaler level, that we utilize their infrastructure. So,
and can there be things that are replicated from on premises?
That'll be coming in Q4.
Yeah, we're working on that as a feature and a capability.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry to add, there was one other question to do with the ones that you'd mentioned about this exact certified versions, etc. When there's no version control in the cloud. This is probably a good time to address the discussion between what you're seeing as version 20 and what we're discussing as what we've also seen on premises version 16. We have announced the 16.1 will be out on premise, but this is version 20, and that's so that you have the ability to move forward with version 20. We we can go forward with on-premises 16.1, but from the SDK perspective, you now have 2 SDKs to choose from, and we have an SAP node out there, which is 3044356, which can also allow you to choose SDK 20 for just strictly cloud connections. And as Tom mentioned earlier, we're going to roll that connectivity into the SDK 16. So if you have on-premise connections, you could use either eventually, but it allows us to keep different release cycles in case you are only going to go to cloud or you only want to stay on-premise, but occasionally connect to the cloud. So as we go forward into, I think it's Q3, we're going to add this capability to our SDK 4.0. So you'll be able to use one SDK if you choose. As far as the actual certification of the version, just like anything else, you would have to certify and ensure that you can run on that particular cloud capability, so that with all the other capabilities that you might need. So generally our rule is that if you certify at the one particular level, higher levels are we will certify that. So if you certify at 20.0 and we release eventually at 20.001, then you should be able to be certified that we will not remove functionality.
Okay, great info. That's very great. One last question. I think this might be interesting to a lot of our listeners. Is there, in addition to the GUI to create the spin up the instances, is there a command line option to do these things?
Yeah, I think I did show that a little bit. I know when you go through these things, not everything sticks. So we basically have there are APIs for doing everything that you do through the GUI. And there's a command line tool that we provide called Cloud Foundry. which is a publicly available tool, and you can basically set up a JSON document that says how you want to configure your instance, and you can run a command and that'll create the instance for you. And you can use the same thing to start and stop. So if you want to like stop some development instances over the weekend, you can have a batch job on your own machine that'll log in and shut down all the development instances or something. So there is API control over provisioning, changing on the fly your configuration, the amount of memory you want. If you want to increase the amount of memory, you can do that through an API, and starting and stopping as well.
That's great. Thank you very much for clarifying that. Well, I think that's all the time we have for now.
Yeah, Ed. Yeah, we're approaching the top of the hour, and we would like to go ahead and bring a close. Obviously, if there's any additional questions that we probably didn't answer, we will post those as normal. This has been a recorded webinar, and we will have it posted on our YouTube channel very shortly here. So if you wish to review some of the information that was the valued information that Chris and Tom and Ed has provided for you today, you feel free to, you'll see a link to that very shortly, as well as if you request any particular deck or anything like that, you simply send us a request for that, and we can send that to you as well. So again, Chris, Ed, Tom, and Ed, thank you so much. Again, we value the information that you guys provided, and we can hopefully continue to do that moving forward as we continue to expand and help grow your environment and become more efficient in your SAP Sybase operations. So, any last questions? Any last responses before we close?
Just to say thank you to Bradmark for the opportunity to present, and it's good to work with partners who have tools that can extend what we do. So that's great, and thanks to the people on the call for taking the time to listen in.
Absolutely.
Thank you all.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. Ed, we will go ahead and close now, and everybody, like I said, we will. If there's any additional questions, we will post. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.